Willie Nelson is more than just a legendary figure in country music. He is a living example of suffering, tenacity, and artistic defiance. He once offered us the song On the Road Again, which encapsulated the beauty of a soul that never stops moving forward, the energy of nomads, and the agony of endless highways. Behind that comforting tune, however, is a man who has endured far more adversity than most might fathom. He has persevered through betrayal, collapse, and unimaginable tragedy for more than 70 years, transforming each scar into a song that was woven throughout millions of people's hearts. He didn't just get by. He transformed sadness into grace, stillness into anthems, and shame into dignity. At 92, Willie still tackles storms with a quiet strength and a fire that never goes out, even though most people would prefer to rest. However, there is a burden that few can comprehend hidden beneath the serene grin, and there might be more unsettling realities in the last years of his journey than ever before. Don't turn away, because the most potent chapter of all may be revealed by what he is still going through. And in honor of a man who gave the world everything and continues to give, please leave a like below if his voice has ever moved you. Some hearts have fissures that are too big for childhood to patch. Willie Nelson was a neglected kid in Abbott, Texas, before he became a legend, before anyone ever heard the roughness in his voice or the heartbreaking beauty of On the Road Again. He was abandoned long before he had a chance to fit in, despite being born in 1933. First to leave, his mother vanished from his life like smoke. No goodbye, no note. His father remarried and vanished as well, hardly able to keep himself together. Although Willie was too little to comprehend betrayal, he was old enough to feel its sting. He and his sister Bobby were abandoned to the care of their impoverished but generous grandparents, who did everything in their power to fill the gaps in the lives of two kids that no one else remained to love. It was survival, not neglect. But the price for that survival was harsh. The boy's only pillar, his silent strength, and his hero was his grandfather, a blacksmith who was the first to ever put a guitar in Willie's hands. Pneumonia also took Willie's life when he was just 6 years old. Not only was that death heartbreaking, but it also destroyed Willie's remaining sense of security. How cruel, how cold, how unbearably painful for a child to know that his parents were still alive. He wrote with aching clarity in his autobiography, "Our separation from mother and daddy seemed worse than a death, because they were still out there in the world, but they weren't with me and Bobby like they were supposed to be." Simply put, uninterested, absent, and unreachable. It was more than grief. Abandonment was the reason. Brutal and unrelenting. When their parents aren't around, most kids cry for them. Willie wept because he knew they would never return. He had stopped playing with toys by the time he reached 7 in 1940. Like a lifeline, he was holding to a guitar. Learning chords was not his pastime. To calm the turmoil in his breast, he learned them. In an attempt to transform suffering into music and sound into survival, he began performing in local pubs and with the Bohemian Pula Band at the age of 9, while other boys played in the dirt. In church, he sang the gospel. He was a young child, nevertheless, singing in God's house, not for salvation, but so that someone would hear him. Even as a child, every stage he walked on was more of a call for connection than a show. He spent many sleepless nights staring at ceilings and wondering why love always left, which led to the creation of the music that eventually calmed millions. That question plagued him even decades later. He remembered in interviews, "There was always that quiet. I filled it with song since no one else was communicating to me." How empty must a house be for the echoes to become lyrics? What sort of ache must a child carry to construct an entire profession out of loneliness? He had already witnessed more loss than most adults. By the time he reached adolescence, graves, farewells, and doors that never reopened, but he continued to sing despite the Texas sun beating down on him, while he picked cotton with bleeding fingers, and the hunger that tore at his heart as well as his stomach. The Texas sun doesn't just shine, it punishes. For a teenage Willie Nelson, the scorching heat became a daily ritual as he bent over cotton fields, his back hurting and his fingers blistered, trying to pull something, anything, out of the ground to keep his family fed. If he hadn't, the silence might have swallowed him whole. It was survival, not ambition. By the time he was 14, sometime around 1947, he had already worked as a disc jockey, encyclopedia salesman, nightclub bouncer, phone operator, tree trimmer, and he had cleaned dishes, patched saddles, climbed poles, and hawked books, door to families so impoverished they didn't even have a couch to sit on. I was selling a $600 set of encyclopedias to people who couldn't afford a decent meal, Willie admitted in a subsequent interview. Something felt off, but you take what you can when you're young, broke, and chasing something as flimsy as a dream. He slept wherever he could, played country music on dirty turntables during the day, and performed in bars at night. Nashville, the place every country musician dreams of, repeatedly slammed its doors in his face. No label, no interest, no promise, just closed doors and long silences. Then came a moment so dark, so piercing, that Willie nearly passed out. Sometimes on floors, sometimes in his car, and sometimes not at all. Living in a dilapidated trailer on the edge of a cemetery, close to Nashville in his 20s, Willie was overcome by feelings of rejection, failure, and excessive drinking to cope with his pain. He decided to lay down in the middle of a normally busy street in the middle of the night. Not because he wanted to make a statement, but because he had no other options. No one stopped, and no one even noticed. He later wrote, "I can't say for sure. All I know is I got up, walked back to the bar, and had another drink." That is not the kind of story that ends in applause, but it is the kind of story that creates legends. The cars swerved past him, as if he hadn't been there. And in that moment, life didn't flash before his eyes. There was only silence. Was I relieved? Was I disappointed? To find his mother, Willie tried hitchhiking to Portland, Oregon one night, without any money, a car, or a place to sleep. When no one stopped, he curled up in a ditch near the highway, with his guitar by his side, his clothes soaked by the rain, wondering how much lower life could go. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is just stand back up again. That moment became part of the quiet mythology that surrounded Willie, not as a superstar, but as a man who refused to stay broken. He would later refer to those years as a long storm, and it was true. Then a stranger, a truck driver, offered him a ride and $10 for a bus ticket. That was his lifeline. Willie Nelson wrote the soundtrack to The Storm long before the world knew his name. In the late 1950s, after years of picking cotton under the harsh Texas sun, trimming trees to stay fed, and making ends meet as a DJ and dishwasher, he still held on to his guitar like it was oxygen. He played nightclubs, sent out demos, and found something stronger than comfort somewhere inside that storm, the raw, unfiltered truth that music was all he had, and it would have to be enough. It was 1959. Willie was broke, living in a small Houston apartment with a baby on the way, and he had written a heartfelt gospel ballad called Family Bible, inspired by memories of his grandmother singing hymns around the dinner table. He scribbled lyrics late into the night, lyrics that would one day define American music. But no one was listening. The song became a radio staple, a top hit for Claude Gray, praised for its timeless message and raw purity. But Willie's name wasn't even on the label. The applause came, but not for him. That heartbreak would become a pattern. He would write song after song over the next few years, each one a masterpiece that slipped into someone else's spotlight. He sold the rights for just $100 because he was desperate to buy groceries. Funny How Time Slips Away was recorded by Billy Walker. Pretty Paper found life via Roy Orbison. Crazy, a haunting tune derived from the deepest recesses of grief and longing, rose to immortal renown through the voice of Patti Cline. It became one of the most played jukebox songs of all time. Though Willie Nelson's lyrics reverberated in every bar and jukebox, the man behind the music was serving drinks rather than signing autographs. Nashville wasn't just silent, it was contemptuous. These songs weren't just songs. They were the emotional architecture of a generation. Producers claimed that he didn't have the right look, no rhinestones, no pompadour, just braided hair, gentle eyes, and a face that had seen every mile, that he didn't hear the soul in the gravel, that he didn't see the poetry in his weariness, and that his voice was too rough, raw, and weathered when he attempted to sing his own truth. He was told he didn't belong because he brought truth. Imagine writing the music for someone else's success, and being told your story wasn't good enough to be heard. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. As other artists rose to the top of the charts thanks to his words, he wandered the shadowy streets looking for used guitars and understanding listeners. Still, he wrote, with every song he gave away, a piece of him vanished into someone else's fame. The heartbreak wasn't loud, but it was constant, the kind of slow ache that burrows into your chest and never quite leaves. He taught Sunday school, worked as a DJ in tiny stations, and played backup in honky-tonks just to make ends meet. For many, this would have been the last verse. For Willie, however, it was simply the quiet before the storm. Nashville had subtly determined in the early 1970s that Willie Nelson didn't fit in. because his songs were unpolished, spiritual, and defiant, and his voice and appearance didn't match their standards. They wanted polish, rhinestones, and radio predictability. His ranch in Ridgetop had burned to the ground just months before, a fire that felt more symbolic than accidental, like the final burning of everything he had tried to be for the industry. At 39 years old, broken and bruised, he could have disappeared when RCA dropped him, and critics wrote him off. He packed up what little pride he had left and drove back to Texas. But something unexpected was waiting in the quiet chaos of Austin, Texas. Austin was different from Nashville. There were no strict suits, no rules about tempo or twang, and long-haired hippies sat next to rodeo cowboys, in smoky bars and backyard stages. It didn't matter if you looked like a rebel. What mattered was that you sounded like one. They saw what Nashville never saw when Willie entered, scarred by rejection but still humming with poetry. In 1973, he released Shotgun Willie, a ragged, unapologetic album that didn't care for radio, didn't beg for approval, and just told the truth. For the first time, people listened to it not because it was flawless, but because it was real. Phases and stages kicked it wider. Then RCA told him to clean up, but Columbia Records let him go wild, and the result was a masterpiece, soft-spoken, almost ghostly. But every note landed like a confession, which was dubbed unmarketable by critics and a revelation by fans. In 1975, he released Red-Headed Stranger, a bare-bones concept album with haunting silences and stripped-down production. In the same year, he collaborated with Juan Jennings, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glazer to produce Wanted, The Outlaws, the first country album to ever achieve platinum status. All of a sudden, the man they had previously written off became the face of a movement. But this was more than just music. It was about defiance, about refusing to be erased. Willie no longer sang about heartbreak. He wore braids, smoked marijuana, played guitar his way, and dared to sound like himself, proving that a new kind of fire could rise from the ashes of rejection. By doing this, he allowed every other misfit, dreamer, and drifter who had been told they didn't fit to do the same. Willie was no longer pursuing stardom. He had grown into something greater, the anthem of the discarded, the voice of the unmarketable. The outlaw had not only found a spotlight, but had constructed his own damn stage. And for the first time in his life, the world looked up and listened. However, as the world was singing his songs, a new storm was quietly brewing behind the spotlight, one from which not even fame could save him. Willie Nelson was still married to Shirley Collie, his second wife, a singer, a partner, and someone who had supported him through long nights on the road and longer silences in the dark. But his personal life was collapsing under the weight of secrets, too heavy to bear at the same time that he was rising from the ashes of rejection. Then came the envelope. One calm afternoon, Shirley accidentally opened a hospital bill that wasn't addressed to her, but the name printed on it was clear. Mrs. Connie Nelson was the mother of a baby girl who was born. Shirley looked at the page, and she didn't have to ask questions, because the truth was there in the numbers and the ink. It wasn't just betrayal. Willie tried to deflect, to downplay, to soften the blow. "It's not a big deal," he said, "just a hospital visit," but the bill said otherwise. Finally, in a quiet, defeated voice, he confessed, "Connie's my girlfriend. Paula's our daughter." The marriage ended, and even though he would later marry Connie, the cost of that union would linger for decades, not just in headlines but in guilt. It was the kind of truth that leaves a scar that no apology can erase. Willie would later say, almost sighing, "There's no such thing as ex-wives, only additional ones." At that same time, his beloved ranch in Ridgetop, where he had poured his heart, roots, and hope, had already burned to the ground. His marriage, his label contract, and Nashville were all gone. The line was humorous, but underneath it was weariness, exhaustion, and the pain of saying goodbye too many times. He would later confess that there was a time when he almost gave up music completely, not because he no longer loved it, but because he feared he no longer had the strength to endure it. He was only 40 years old, emotionally bankrupt, spiritually hollowed out, and sitting in the ruins of everything he had tried to build. Nevertheless, he was drawn back to the stage, despite his broken heart and troubled conscience. Perhaps it was stubbornness, perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was the voice of a child who once strummed a guitar in a church pew, believing that music could still heal. In addition to his voice and songs, Willie Nelson was unique because of the way he bled quietly and continued to walk through heartbreak, failure, and fire while singing non-stop. The flames did more than just destroy his home. They also robbed him of the last semblance of stability in his life. They believed he was done, a man whose voice was too raw, whose look was too weathered, whose best songs had been sold off and sung by others. However, as his marriage fell apart and Nashville closed its doors, Willie was not simply leaving behind a career. He was entering the unknown with only his scars and a sound the world had never heard. By the early 1970s, Willie Nelson had been quietly pushed out of Nashville, like a faded page from a lost book. His marriage to Shirley Collie had fallen apart in scandal and grief. His ranch in Ridgetop had burned to the ground. Ashes and smoke where his dreams once stood. And RCA, the last thing holding him to the business, wanted him to bend or break, but he didn't. Austin wasn't waiting with a record deal or a shiny stage, but rather with something far more rare: freedom. The kind of freedom that smelled like beer and sweat in roadside bars. Willie Nelson, at 39, packed up the remnants of his life and went back to Texas, the only place that didn't ask him to change. The kind of freedom where music wasn't manufactured and instead bled, breathed, and burned, straight from the soul, dancing barefoot on dirt floors under starry skies. Austin, in the early 1970s, was a place of chaos and harmony, with long-haired hippies strumming alongside aging cowboys, and radicals and rednecks sitting shoulder to shoulder in small venues that didn't care if your boots were polished, as long as your song was honest. And Willie Nelson found home in this wild, beautiful mess. He stopped trying to impress Nashville and wrote and sang like the man he really was. In 1973, he released Shotgun Willie, an album that didn't apologize for anything. It was defiant, sharp, and unpolished, just like the man himself. Fans felt it in their bones, while critics weren't sure what to think of it. He was speaking the truth. That album broke the surface. Phases and stages followed, including a concept album about heartbreak that felt like pages torn directly from his bruised soul. Red-Headed Stranger, which he released in 1975, was deemed a mistake by the record label because it was too quiet, too sparse, and too strange. He teamed up with Juan Jennings, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glaser to record Wanted, The Outlaws, the first country album to ever go platinum, that same year. But that was the point. It sounded like Willie. That album, which was built on soft strums and ghostly silences, didn't scream for attention. Instead, it whispered, and the world leaned in to listen. It went multi-platinum, and the outlaw was no longer hiding. A TBI heart full of scars. A voice that finally had space to echo. Willie grew his hair, wore what he wanted, smoked what he wanted, and played like a man who had been reborn without rhinestones, or the need for approval, all because they were working together to rewrite the rules, not just play music. In the untamed heart of Texas, the world began to listen to the guy who was once commanded to sit down and be silent. Willie didn't just return to music, he returned to himself. He didn't claw his way back into the spotlight. Instead, he created a new one with his own hands, his own chords, and his own truth. By the early 1990s, Willie Nelson had already accomplished the seemingly impossible. He had rebuilt his stage, risen from the ashes, revolutionized country music, and become a symbol of outlaw soul. However, just when everyone thought he had survived every storm, another one struck, this time in the form of a letter, rather than fire or heartache. Willie's ranch, studio, and memories were all gone when federal agents raided his home, confiscated his valuable recording equipment, and even took his beloved guitar, Trigger. The IRS demanded $16.7 million in unpaid taxes, and years of financial mismanagement, poor advisors, and blind trust had caught up with him. For Willie, it was more than just losing things. It was witnessing his life's work being bundled up and taken out the door. This was a gut punch that could have ended his life, but it didn't, so he chose to work rather than hide. Willie didn't whine or place blame. When the world knocked him down, he didn't fold. Instead, he did what he always did. He made music. But this time it was for survival, not the charts. In 1992, he recorded an album titled The IRS Tapes. Who Will Buy My Memories, with just his voice and a bare studio. The idea was straightforward, unvarnished, and honest. No glamour, no production, just pain, memory, and melody. Broadcast and sold directly to the public through late-night infomercials, a man singing his story, offering up his past to buy back his future. But then something amazing happened. America listened. And fans, both new and old, came together to support him and purchase the album out of love rather than sympathy. They recalled the songs he had given them on their most lonely nights, and now they returned the favor. It was the kind of triumphant return that could not be manufactured by a marketing machine, one that was fueled by the sheer power of connection, rather than labels or producers. Willie gradually reduced the amount of debt he owed, dollar by dollar. Instead of filing for bankruptcy or hiding behind attorneys, he stepped in front of his audience and sang, and they responded. By the mid-1990s, the most of the debt had been paid off. He had regained his dignity and trigger. And more importantly, he had reminded everyone that perseverance is stronger than failure. Even legends bleed in silence. And for Willie Nelson, the deepest wounds came not from rejection or failure, but from the faces he would never see again. For most artists, the IRS tapes would have been a depressing footnote. But for Willie, they were just another chapter in a story that would not end. While millions lit candles, opened presents, and embraced family on Christmas Day, 1991, Willie received a phone call that broke something irrevocable. His firstborn son, Billy Nelson, had died tragically while working on a gospel album that was a reflection of faith and fragility. For years afterward, every note he strummed carried an echo of Billy's voice, an unfinished memory. But behind closed doors, a quiet storm had been raging. Willie would later say, in the most devastating of words, "I've never experienced anything so devastating in my life. There are no songs for a pain like that, no melody for a silence that deep." Fans say they could hear it in his voice, a weight behind each lyric, a quiet pause where there never used to be one, and that empty chair at every family gathering. And every Christmas since then, behind the lights and the laughter, there lived a father's ache. Quiet but unrelenting, a wound dressed in music, but never healed. It still remains there. In February 2020, Willie was already preparing for a different kind of loss, the kind that had been threatening him for decades, when his drummer, bodyguard, outlaw partner, and brother in spirit, Paul English, died at the age of 87. At that time, the world was only starting to talk about a virus. When Willie was still sleeping in cars and playing for change in 1955, Paul showed up with a cardboard box and a pair of paintbrushes and claimed to be able to drum. Somehow he succeeded, and Paul was there through endless highways, bar fights, and empty wallets. Paul wasn't just a bandmate, he was family. One of Willie's quotes was, "If I hadn't gone with Willie, I'd be in the penitentiary or dead." And it wasn't a joke. Paul was Willie's rock in the chaos, carrying cash, protecting the band, settling scores, and occasionally collecting debts with a pistol in his boot. When bandmates argued, Paul simply looked and silence fell. Willie's daughter Amy referred to Paul as the co-patriarch of their family after his death, saying that he was more than just keeping time on the drums, he was keeping the family together. And when that beat stopped, something in Willie's world also fell silent. On stage, the band continued to play. This stillness grew 2 years later, in 2022, when Willie's sister Bobby Nelson died. Bobby was more than just his sibling. She was his first duet partner, his first bandmate, and his lifelong musical shadow. However, Willie felt that something was missing from the rhythm, something that could never be replaced, just recalled. After both parents abandoned them, they were raised by their grandparents together. Bobby, who played on his first records and stood next to him at the family piano, was aware of every scar he had carried since he was a young child. Together, they co-wrote a book called Me and Sister Bobby, which is a love letter to music and resiliency. "I wouldn't be where I am now without my sister," Willie wrote in the book. "I've needed her all my life." It was more than just a loss when she passed away. It was the disintegration of a bridge to his former self. She was more than simply a song. He had a memory of her, an observer of the years that no one else could recall. Willie lost more than just a sister when Bobby left. He lost a lifetime harmony, a truth keeper, and a historian. Her favorite songs are still played by him, but he does so more slowly now, as though he's waiting for a note that never comes. In the echo, as though waiting to hear her voice. Then came the last blow, like if fate wasn't done yet. Willie's brother-in-arms, fellow highway worker, and only confidant, Chris Christopherson, died in September 2024 at the age of 88. They had a friendship that went beyond work. It was cosmic. The renegade fire that continues to blaze today was started by two poets who refused to be polished. Together with Juan Jennings and Johnny Cash, they formed the Highwaymen, a formidable band of rebels who lived and sang about freedom. Chris was the Harvard grad who pitched songs by sweeping floors. The Texan vagrant who transformed suffering into poetry was Willie. They were a match made in heaven. The travel, the stage, the backstage banter, The subpar lodgings, and the silent moments before the curtain raised, were all shared by them. Willie stated that Chris left many wonderful tunes for the rest of us to sing after his death. Losing him was terrible. It was more than simply tunes, though. Losing the final voice that genuinely understood him was the issue. Willie stood by himself, having lost Johnny, Juan, and now Chris, the last highwayman. His trademark braids and soft grin may give fans the impression that nothing has changed. But you can see it if you look closely. A weight on his shoulders, a spark in his eyes. The exhaustion of a man who has witnessed too many sunsets while missing a friend. Thus, something is lacking when Willie takes the stage at 92, or many of stuff. He's still grinning. He continues to strum. Behind that serene warmth, however, is a man traversing a cemetery of recollections. A legend is seen by the crowd. A poet without his muse, a band leader without his beat, a father without his son, and a brother without his sister are all on stage. Time heals, so the saying goes. Some wounds, however, just pick up the ability to sing. And Willie continues to do so in some way. He doesn't scream. He doesn't pass out. He acts in the same manner as always. Transforms sadness into verse and grief into song. There will be a song, a dialogue with ghosts, and a chord-based prayer as long as he has breath. This is not merely a tale of sorrow. It's a tale of perseverance. Love that transcends physical limitations. Sorrow that influences musical compositions. And a single man who lives on, bringing the spirits of his closest friends with him in each chord he plays. Know this if his music has ever moved you. These days, every song is a dialogue with the people he lost. Each line is a supplication in a whisper. Every performance is a rhythmic eulogy. Perhaps this explains Willie Nelson's continued presence. To turn the suffering into something the world can accept, not to run away from it. Behind the worn smile of Willie Nelson, a silent conflict rages. One that's inscribed in every breath he breathes, yet doesn't appear in album rankings or headlines. His struggle with health had started long before he became a legendary outlaw. In a heartbreaking confession from his memoir, Willie said that when he was only 6 years old, he traded packs of Camel cigarettes for eggs from his family's chicken coop. What began as a child's attempt to mimic maturity quickly turned into a shadow that lasted a lifetime. Over time, the shadow deepened, affecting not only him but also people in his immediate vicinity. He eventually admitted that his mother, father, stepmother, and stepfather had all died from cigarettes. He wrote, "Cigarettes killed half of my family members," but he was unable to give it up for decades. He laughed through the burn, sung through the smoke, and toured through the wheezing. He didn't make the adjustment until much later, after the harm was irreparable. Emphysema, a gradual, cruel illness that erodes the lungs and makes every breath a conscious effort, was Willie's diagnosis. His condition was rapidly deteriorating in 2015, so he had a stem cell procedure to restore some of the lung tissue. The years of deterioration had now caught up with him. His lung had collapsed, and media outlets were speculating about his impending retirement. However, his soul disregarded his body's warning to slow down. He said, "I don't feel bad," to the media. "I don't have any reason to worry about dying. I don't hurt anywhere." The statement sounded bold, but it was also tinged with tired knowledge. For years, Willie's relationship with marijuana became as iconic as his music. He eventually quit smoking tobacco, but he turned to marijuana not out of rebellion, but relief, because it kept him upbeat even when his lungs were heavy, reduced inflammation, and dulled pain. However, even that chapter had to end. When smoking anything became too risky, he changed again, this time to edibles. It was a silent, almost poetic change. The fire was gone, but the spark was still there. Willie had managed to adjust without sacrificing who he was. But what's perhaps most powerful isn't how he suffered, but how he's persevered. Those closest to him see something different from what the world sees: a man who wakes up in pain, but still picks up his guitar. A man who has lost his breath but continues to sing. A man whose voice has gotten thinner, but whose soul becomes louder. He's had to postpone performances, take pauses, and withdraw to the seclusion of his Texas home. But he always returns. According to his son Lucas, Willie's tenacity is more than just obstinacy, it's purpose. And that's what inspires me about him. His resilience in the face of adversity, Lucas said. He has composed a verse to replace each scar on his lungs. There was a new chord for each diagnosis. Most men count pills at age 92. Willie is counting down to his upcoming performance. He no longer moves as easily as he used to. His frame is slimmer, and his gait is slower. However, there remains a glimmer in his eyes that will not go away. His spirit hasn't been deceived, even though his health has. He's not merely getting by, he's turning hardship into history. Because you become more than just an artist when you choose to sing despite facing your own breath as an enemy. You turn into a living example. And Willie Nelson conveys the tale of what it means to live even when your body begs you not to, with each whisper of breath he captures today. Willie Nelson is 92 years old, and his life feels more like a poem than a retirement. He has established a tranquil life on a secluded ranch in the middle of Texas, far from fading into obscurity. A location where the wind resembles the strings of his old guitar as it hums through the woods. Willie's house is more than just a piece of real estate. It is surrounded by fields, open spaces, and animals. It's a haven. The actual ranch has hundreds of acres in size and is valued at more than $3 million. It is situated close to Spicewood, Texas. It is modest but rich in history, holding not only his treasured possessions, but also the remnants of a life molded by harmony and fire. Memorabilia from decades of music and memories abound within the house. But today, the individuals inside are what really count to him. Willie's world has become his family. His life and work are actively influenced by his kids, particularly Lucas and Amy. As a gifted musician in his own right, Lucas frequently performs with his father, continuing the tradition both musically and emotionally. Amy follows the musical route as well. Together, they give more than just concerts. These are intergenerational discussions, reverberations of Willie's childhood. This time, there is continuity and love rather than uncertainty. Willie's body shows the physical effects of a lifetime of traveling. Even though his skin is thin and wrinkled from age, he still has that distinctive twinkle in his eyes. Mischief, peace, and hard-won wisdom mixed together. He used to smoke a lot, but he stopped using tobacco and then marijuana, switching to edibles to help with the pains of aging. After receiving a diagnosis of emphysema years ago, he became more concerned about his health, which resulted in a stem cell treatment in 2015 that helped stabilize his lungs. He still maintains his health now through organic diet, meditation, gentle yoga, herbal supplements, long walks around the ranch, and a modest but disciplined lifestyle. He respects age rather than chasing youth. In terms of money, the man who lost everything to the IRS has recovered his fortune with incredible fortitude. Willie is now a discreetly rich man once more, because to tour earnings, royalties, commercial endorsements, and a popular line of CBD products. Not that he shows it off. His estimated net worth is between $25 million, $30 million as of 2025. In addition to his renowned catalog and live performances, Willie's Remedy, his popular CBD product brand, and a small Austin real estate holdings are the main sources of income. A large amount of his value comes from his ranch alone. Everywhere he goes, he still carries his cherished guitar trigger, now scarred and revered, wears the same old boots, and travels in the same dilapidated tour van. Like Willie himself, that guitar has experienced thunder and fire. It still sings though. His 76th solo studio album, The Last Leaf on the Tree, which he co-produced with his son Micah, was released in April 2025. There's more to the CD than just a bunch of tunes. It is a declaration of survival, presence, and introspection. The weight of loss, the truth of age, and the ease of letting go are all explored in depth in each song. It's not depressing though. It has soul. It's not a farewell. It's a note of grace. Critics are hailing the album as one of the most significant late-career records in the history of country music. Willie still performs live despite his advanced age. He shocked the world in October 2024 when he and Beyoncé took the stage together in Texas. It was more than just a performance to see him next to a world-renowned pop star, thin and steady, strumming. It served as a bridge across cultures and served as a reminder to everyone of the ageless value of genuineness. Willie is currently the only surviving member of the renowned country supergroup The Highwaymen. Like echoes carved into every note he plays, he carries not just his own memories but also theirs. Although he hasn't made a formal will announcement, many close to him attest that he has discreetly organized his affairs, such that his children will inherit not only his property, but also the essence of his music. Willie's outlook on dying is still as serene and realistic as his songs. I don't have any injuries. In 2025, he told the Associated Press, "I don't worry about dying." It wasn't a brag. It was a representation of the calm gained over many years of enduring hardships and grieving souls. He has given up fighting time. He's happy about it. For the sake of music, this guy has sacrificed everything: his voice, his words, his injuries. He continues to give. He continues to tour. He continues to produce. Under Texas skies, he still laughs with pals. You've carried a bit of him with you, if you've ever tapped your foot to one of his songs, wiped away a tear during one of his lyrics, or found yourself humming along with him on a lengthy drive. Maybe now is the time to reciprocate the gratitude. For the man as well as the song, hit like, leave a remark, and share a memory. Because there are voices that never stop speaking. There are hearts that never cease singing.